Welcome to our YouTube channel dedicated to military affairs in Ukraine. Explore the latest updates, in-depth analysis, and captivating stories about the Ukrainian armed forces. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support our channel. Join our YouTube channel to delve into the world of Ukrainian military. From exclusive interviews with military experts to on-the-ground coverage of defense events, we bring you comprehensive insights. Subscribe and show your support by liking our videos. Looking for an authoritative source on military matters in Ukraine? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for regular updates, informative videos, and engaging discussions. Hit the subscribe and like buttons to stay connected with the latest in Ukrainian military affairs.
Let me tell you why you're wrong. Let's just start off with the Persian Gulf. Is China's go-to move in the Persian Gulf to deploy military forces there? No. Their go-to move was to make peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, to, in effect, demilitarize the problem so that the solution is about the economy, about stability. China does not want to build an American-style, China's in a downward spiral. All right, Carsey. Yeah, I believe that. Nobody believes that.
Can we go back to the last question for a second, Scott? Because this, if this is true, this is a good point. There's a new whistleblower protection law, especially for UFO investigators. That's why it's happening now. Is that true?
I don't know anything about that.
All right.
What I can say, though, about whistleblower laws is you never have the right, ever, to release classified information. Whistleblowers don't have a right to go to the press. That's what people don't understand. Whistleblowers have to go to Congress. That's what a whistleblower does. You blow the whistle to Congress. The second you go to the press, you're not a whistleblower. You're a traitor. You committed treason. It's done. Now, I'm not saying that's because I believe you committed treason. I'm saying what the law says you just did. So this guy isn't protected by a whistleblower law if he's willing to talk to the press.
All right.
So now now back to the Navy. China's not in the business of building blue water navies. That's not what they do. The Navy that they're building right now is designed to protect the South China Sea, which is part of the 9-dash line or 12-dash line, whatever you want to talk about. It's considered to be part of China's contiguous border, Chinese territory. A blue water navy is a navy that goes outside of your territories and projects power abroad, and China's not in that business. And therefore, because they're not in that business, why? First of all, let's say they were in that business. Who are we to contain them? Sweden? Really? I mean, is it our job to contain China? Because if that's the case, then wouldn't China have a right to say it's our job to contain America and its blue water navy? I mean, why does America get to have a blue water navy? Because we're a Pacific power? Don't you think the Chinese are a Pacific power? Therefore, don't they rate a blue water navy? This is the kind of mirror imaging that's going on here. No, I think your entire premise is wrong. Flawed, fundamentally flawed. China's in the business of building a global economic engine. And the one thing that takes down global economic engines is instability. And war is all about instability. And China building a blue water navy to project military power in the corners of the world will only promote war and conflict, which generates instability, which is the vaccine, and not the vaccine, it's poison to what the Chinese are trying to do economically. So literally, no, I disagree with you.
Sloika in Connecticut, my home state. Which is a higher risk for possible intentional or accidental conflict between the USA and Russia? NATO in Ukraine or U.S. forces in Syria? And what is this unprofessional activity that is mentioned for a reason to deploy F-22s in Syria?
First of all, the F-22s are not deployed in Syria. The F-22s, I think, are deployed in Qatar, and then they fly to Syria for their air patrols. The unprofessional activity is that the Russians are tired of allowing the United States to penetrate the air defense of a sovereign state. That's called Syria. America has not been invited into Syria. We illegally occupy Syria, a third of Syria. We illegally steal Syrian oil. We illegally support a terrorist organization. That's the YPG or the PKK. Why do I call them terrorists? Because we call them terrorists. That's what they are. The PKK is the Turkish Workers' Party, Kurdish unit organization, tried to, is fighting for the independence of Kurdistan. I'm not sitting here saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. It's not my business. What I am saying is that the Turks view them, the PKK, as a terrorist organization. The United States has concurred. So has Europe. The PKK is therefore a terrorist organization in the eyes of many people, including the United States. And yet, because we're against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, what we've done is come in and make common cause with a Syrian adjunct of the PKK called the YPG. But we, in order to deal with them, we just had them rebrand themselves. So they became the Syrian Democratic Forces, democratic in name only, but they're still terrorists. So we support a terrorist organization. We steal Syrian oil, and we illegally occupy 1/3 of Syria. In order to do this, we project air power. Those are those, no-fly zones. We project air power into Syria. And what the Russians have done is said, we're not happy with this. This is the Syrian government isn't happy. The Russians, by the way, were invited into Syria by the Syrian government. So every Russian aircraft that flies over Syrian territory, every Russian soldier on the ground, are there legally at the invitation of the Syrian government. And so Russia is increasingly challenging the American, this American presence. And so what happens is the Russians will shadow American aircraft. The Russians will jam American aircraft. They'll fly alongside and they will shut down the electronics. And when the Americans get too close to Syrian airspace, the Russians will bum rush them, come up and do what we call a dangerous maneuver, which is to get close. Now, a real dangerous maneuver is to stay 100 kilometers back and paint them with radar, because that's how they're going to get shot down. They're not going to get shot down by this close stuff. That only happens in Top Gun. Planes don't fight like this anymore. They fight by taking off, missile, shooting down. So that's what the United States is doing. It's a show force. It's a propaganda move, but it's meaningless. First of all, the F-22, when it takes off from Qatar, has to refuel before it gets over to Syria. Ask yourself how much loiter time they have in Syria. Can they loiter forever? And the answer is no. So they come in, they have very limited operational capability. It's either drop a bomb, shoot a missile, and then go home, get refueled. But you're going to have to refuel someplace. It doesn't matter if it's an F-22, an F-35, an F-16. The aircraft is not capable of doing anything other than intimidating ISIS or Al-Qaeda. It sure as hell isn't scaring the Russians.
All right, our next question comes from Timothy in St. Petersburg, Russia. In an episode of The Simpsons, one can see a map of the USSR, including Finland, Sweden, and Norway. The prediction is timed to the 79th UN Congress, which will be next year. How possible is this scenario, as, for example, we see that Finland steps up its involvement in the conflict? The Simpsons is known for amazingly accurate predictions that come true. And you thought we were in tinfoil hat land with the UFOs.
I'm sorry, Timothy. The Simpsons is a cartoon. And the people...
What?
The people that write it are very clever people, but they don't know anything about geopolitics, stuff like that. They're clever.
Known for their predictions.
They're known for their predictions. Yeah. I mean, Bart Simpson is my idol. Homer is the man. But no. First of all, it's a map of the USSR. It doesn't exist anymore. So if they're predicted for this prediction to come true, Russia would have to somehow flip back to the USSR and then magically acquire Finland, Sweden, and Norway. It's a cartoon. It's a parody on life. It's an exaggeration of everything. A lot of their humor is the fact that they pick on things and exaggerate it, blow it up out of proportion to intensify the humor that can be generated from it. I think it's a great show. I laugh at Bart and I laugh at Homer and I laugh at all of the characters in that show But I'd be hard pressed to find out that the Simpsons predicted anything.
Somebody said they predicted Trump.
Well, hell, I
Well,
predicted Trump.
well, there was a 50-50 chance anyway, so I don't know,
Trump.
Theo from Europe. How does the Monroe Doctrine apply to South America? How would the U.S. react if Brazil or Argentina would accept to host Russian or Chinese military bases? You just opened another beverage, didn't you?
No comment.
I heard it. It's reverberating in my eardrums still.
I apologize.
Coca-Cola and you're coughing. Everybody's worried about your cough, by the way. What's going on with the cough? Fess up, Scott. What's really going on?
I don't know.
Get me Voldemort if you're not going to give me the truth.
I got look. I just this.
You blamed it on yelling about a dog. I've never heard of anybody who gets a cough from yelling at a dog. Maybe you get hoarse, but you don't get a cough.
No, the cough's been around for a while, but I did just go to the doctor, and they checked out my heart and lung sounds, and my lungs are clear, and my heart is fully functional. And while I was in Russia, I was given the full body scan by the most sophisticated doctors in the world, apparently, and they've deemed that I am perfect in every way, shape, and form, except for a little bit of neuropathy. Having said that, oh, by the way, just to announce, I am running a Spartan race tomorrow because I am a stud warrior.
You want to show the audience your T-shirt that you showed me before?
Well, it was a shirt it's not here right now. It was modeled after me, basically. Marina and I were trying to do some marketing. We've been talking about maybe making some shirts and stuff with Maverick on it. And I said, well, why not?
What happened to the shirt? You put it right down next to you before. Who took it away?
Voldemort took it away.
Oh. Wow.
Anyways, the cough is residual. I don't know what's going on, but it's not deadly. They checked me out. I'm doing well.
And did they tell you to keep drinking a lot of Coke?
Oh, drop dead, Jeff. You and everybody else is telling me to get. I have to look. I'll say this. We make light of it. I got a Diet Coke addiction. I'll admit it. I'm addicted to Diet Coke. I don't know if it's a physical addiction, but it's a psychological addiction. When I write, I can't write unless I have a Diet Coke next to me. So I have to learn how to get off this stuff. It's not good for me. I understand that. And so I am working in that direction. So for all the kind people out there, especially those Russians who are listening, who told me to stop drinking Diet Coke, it's on my agenda.
Do they have Diet Coke in Russia? Do they have it there?
They had it. Yeah. But they made it difficult for me to drink because early on, like I said, I got a total body scan because my body sort of stopped functioning while I was over there. Not majorly, but I was having trouble doing walking and stuff like that. So they checked me out. And one of the things they said is, you really need to stop drinking Diet Coke. And I said, oh, sure, I'll do that. But then I started shaking and they got the willy-nillys and, but they made it very hard for me to drink Diet Coke while I was over there. So I came back home to the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I'm exercising my.
But we've seen all this footage of you. You were so active. You did so many things. If you were you must have had some energy without the Diet Coke. There's a hole in the story here. What am I missing?
No, I'm always active and all that. What you're missing is that when I went to bed at night, I was exhausted. And when I woke up in the morning, I was exhausted. And, I'm just an energetic, enthusiastic guy. Plus they fed me very well. So I was very well fed. There was a lot of fuel in the engine, so to speak. Pelmeni, stroganoff.
All right. I've nagged you enough. Let's go on. Did we already do this one?
Look,
no, we didn't.
How would U.S. react if Brazil or Argentina? First of all, Brazil is a sovereign nation, as Argentina is a sovereign nation. They can do whatever the hell they want to do. Now, I would imagine what the U.S. would do is tell Brazil or Argentina that if they accepted Russian or Chinese military bases, that they have positioned themselves to be potentially hostile to the United States, and that the United States would take the appropriate actions. The day and age of America going down and invading South American countries is over. We couldn't even run a coup against Venezuela. So it's not as though we'd attack Brazil or Argentina, but we would sanction them, we would isolate them, and then what would happen is Brazil and Argentina would gravitate away from America and seek to join alternative organizations like BRICS. Ooh, they've already done that. So, I mean, so after all, the B in BRICS is Brazil, and Argentina has applied to join, and they both are talking about dumping the dollar. So, there's not much the United States can do anymore. I mean, we have basically backed ourselves into a corner where we're losing the financial clout. People used to say that nobody would dump the dollar because the cost associated with that is too high. But basically, what the United States has done because of its bad policy is we've made the cost associated with keeping the dollar too high. It's no longer convenient to be associated with the dollar because the dollar comes with a lot of baggage, and that baggage is attached to the United States, which is a dysfunctional, hypocritical nation. I mean, nobody wants to be a part of this anymore. I mean, Europe has invested too much. They can't back out. Canada's next door. But look at Mexico. Mexican president is not too thrilled about being associated with the United States. He's talking about dumping the dollar too. So, look, if Brazil and Argentina did that, it would be problematic, which is why they're not going to do that. First of all, why would Brazil or Argentina want to have a Russian or Chinese military base in, when the better thing to do is to invite Chinese businesses to come in to use the Belts and Roads Initiative to develop their respective infrastructures, and to enter into financially viable, beneficial energy relationships with Russia, which is what everybody's doing. So there won't be any military bases there.
All right. Now, I said I wasn't going to nag you anymore, but somebody posted a suggestion that is making me curious. The suggestion is that's because you talk so much. It's a strain on, well, no. You do talk a lot, right? You do a lot of interviews. So you talk a lot more than the average person, and he says it's a strain on your vocal cords. Is that a theory that you've ever discussed with a doctor? I don't know.
No, I never discussed that with the doctor. I just go to the first of all, I don't like.
Sounds more believable than the UFOs landing, or determining politics by the Simpsons.
I think I got an alien incubating inside of me, and so.
All right, I think that's worth exploring.
Please. Marina's not impressed with that, but
no, she's not. Okay. Wolfinho and from Copenhagen, Denmark. Can you explain the role of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the counteroffensive? Russia is supposed to have a really strong navy, but the only thing we have heard about is the sinking of Moskva and the retake of Snake Island. Why doesn't Russia use the navy much more actively and offensively, for example, to bomb Odessa?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by offensively? Does the Russian Black Sea Fleet have to sail close to the Ukrainian shore so that it can be seen by the Ukrainians, and that would be offensive? Or what happens if it sorties out of their base in Sevastopol and assumes an operational stance in the middle of the Black Sea, well outside of the range of any potential Ukrainian weapons to strike them, where they then fire caliber missiles that go into Ukraine and strike strategic targets? What if they do that with a series of ships, the corvettes that they have, frigates that they have, the submarines that they have? Because that's exactly what they're doing. The Black Sea Fleet is actively engaged in this war, and it is doing a whole bunch of damage to the Ukrainian infrastructure. Ukrainian air defense is being taken out by the Black Sea Fleet. Ask yourself why the Russian Air Force is able to operate so freely in the zone of operations of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It's because the Black Sea Fleet is part of a concerted effort to suppress enemy air defense. They're also destroying, warehouses. They're destroying troop concentrations. They're destroying command and control targets. They continue to destroy energy-related targets, the energy infrastructure. So the Black Sea Fleet is very much involved. But the loss of the Moskva, the cruiser that was the flagship, showed that there is a danger associated with operating near the shore. You remember when I talked about the American fleet You know, if you bring those aircraft carriers too close to the Iranian shore, the Chinese shore, at a time we're in war, they'll sink them. Well, the Moskva got too close to the Ukrainian shore, and the Ukrainians had weapons that were guided by American intelligence, and they sunk the Moskva. So that's why the Black Sea Fleet now operates outside of the range of those. And it does limit, for instance, there might be some targets in the extreme periphery of Ukraine that can't be reached by those targets, but that's okay. They're offset by the fact that the Russians have a tremendous amount of surface-to-surface missile capability or air-launched capability from Tu-95 bombers, Tu-22 bombers, and other bombers that can take off, fly to the north, and create coverage of all these targets that the Black Sea Fleet can't handle. So the Black Sea Fleet handles this, the Russian Air Force handles this, and the Russian missile forces handle this, and together they saturate the totality of the Ukrainian airspace. The Black Sea Fleet plays a very major role in the ongoing combat operations against Ukraine today.
Ann Moss is curating our questions backstage. Let's do one more of the questions submitted in advance and then go to live questions coming in on YouTube and Facebook. Don in Toronto, Ukraine. Did we ask this already?
It was a different version of the thing.
Ukraine was shelling the Nova. Give me another chance to try to get the pronunciation correct. Kakhovka. You don't pronounce the first K, right? Nova Kakhovka dam for months. Why did the Russians not defend the structure by taking out the Ukrainian missiles? We did that.
The Russians did take out Ukrainian missiles. They did defend the structure. It's just, this is war. It's hard to do. What do they say in the legal profession? Question asked, question answered.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm a little redundant. All right. That's it for our questions in advance. Let's go to the live questions. What do you have for us, Sam? Valley, one of our favorites. Hello, Valley. Did you know that Valley is a moderator on what's that other podcast you did the other day? The one for 3 hours, right?
The Duran?
Yeah, the Duran. Did you know that?
Valley's a moderator for the Duran?
Yeah, I don't know what that entails exactly, but that's what I learned.
Okay.
June 14th, aka Flag Day in the United States. RT article titled Sergei Karaganov. By using its nuclear weapons, Russia could save humanity from a global catastrophe. If you read it, what's your take? It's scary. Thanks so much. Thank you, Valley.
Sergei Karaganov is a Russian intellectual, military theorist who has recently come out with a statement that implies that Russia has no choice but to alter its nuclear posture, the protocols under which nuclear weapons could be used, and basically he's so negative about the ongoing existential conflict between Russia and the West that he believes eventually Russia will have to use nuclear weapons against the West, and so he's promoting a Russian preemptive nuclear strike doctrine, and the notion of a limited nuclear war. Basically, he's saying that Russia could launch a first strike and thereby neutralize American and NATO nuclear capacity to save the world, because void of this, it will be the Americans and NATO that will initiate a global nuclear holocaust. This is roughly what he said. I know people are going to come back and throw things at me, but this is my understanding of roughly what he said. Seymour Hersh wrote an interesting article in his Substack that touches upon this gentleman's statements, and I think what I said also captures what Seymour Hersh's takeaway is from this. The good news is that this guy's not in charge of anything. He's purely an intellectual. He's he's a Russian patriot who's very concerned about what he sees going on. But the guy that I would listen to is Vladimir Putin. He's the Russian president, and he gave a very important speech today. Jeff, I know you're doing that show with Arkady. Arkady may want to find some time to dissect the address that Putin gave today at St. Petersburg. If I were to list the 10 greatest speeches of the last century, Putin would have 3 of them.
Wow.
And this speech right now would make Putin have 4, because this is such an important, powerful speech that he gave that resonates so importantly about the world situation today. Among the many issues that he addressed, actually is a pretty funny statement. He talked about arms control. This is bad news for me, by the way, because I'm a promoter of arms control. And Putin basically said, we've been trying to do arms control, and the West just ignores us and has, sought the strategic defeat, et cetera, et cetera. So we've now gone out and we've built the best nuclear force in the world. We have better missiles than they do. We have more missiles than they do. We're better than they are. And now they want to talk about arms control and disarmament. And he used the term "chen im." Now, chen, I believe, is the term for horseradish. So their horseradishes is what it would mean literally, but it means fuck them. And it's a Russian slang word that means exactly that, fuck them. And Vladimir Putin, in a
Well,
live,
is it a negotiating stance, or really is opposed to arms control?
he's telling the West to fuck off. That it's absurd for you to come to us now and talk about arms control when you've created the situation yourself. The Russians have made it clear. Lavrov, Rybakov, everybody. If you want to do arms control with Russia, the first thing you have to do is stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the war in Ukraine, and then stop your policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. Russia cannot contemplate any arms control agreement that has an impact on the effectiveness of its strategic nuclear deterrence at a time when it's the policy of the United States and the collective West to strategically defeat Russia. It makes no sense. And that's why Putin today basically said, fuck them. We're not playing that game. We're not listening to you. We're not interested. Leave.
Horseradish. The Russian word for horseradish means fuck off.
Well, basically, what I understand is "chen" is close to another word that I won't say that deals with a certain anatomical feature of most men. And so basically it's
most men.
Well, there's some men who identify as men who don't have this anatomical feature.
Oh, okay.
But so again, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that basically this is a colloquialism that has a very crude context. So even though the word itself is not crude, the way he used it has it
means that. Okay. There's no end to what we learn on this show. There's no end.
No end.
All right, Ann, you got your finger on the button for the next question from Bhagavad Gita. Does Scott know if there are tactical nuclear weapons being moved about by the West against Russia and China? I don't know. Let's ask him. Scott, do you know?
Well, when you say the West, I think we would say that the nations that define the West that have nuclear weapons capability are the United States, Great Britain, and France. Tactical nuclear weapons. What is a tactical nuclear weapon? It's a weapon that's designed to be used in an operational context on the battlefield. So basically, it's not a city killer. It's not designed to strike strategic targets. It's not a counterforce weapon to take out the other enemy's nuclear capacity. It's a weapon that you would use in a conventional war situation where the enemy, for instance, achieved a massive breakthrough of your lines and they have a large number of troops coming and you have insufficient conventional reserves to seal that off. A tactical nuke would be used to strike those forces to prevent their further advance. That's a tactical nuke. It's usually delivered by aircraft or short-range missiles. Now, the United States has complicated this by fielding something called the W76-2, which is a low-yield nuclear warhead that's mounted on a Trident missile that's deployed on Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. So now we've taken a strategic asset, which is an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine with a Trident intercontinental ballistic missile, and we put a battlefield tactical nuclear weapon on it. And so I'll give you an example. The United States just sent a missile carrying submarine to South Korea to dock in the port. In effect, that submarine's there to intimidate the North Koreans, but it could also be used against the Russians who are flexing their muscles in the seas north of Japan, or the Chinese who are flexing their muscles in the Taiwan Strait in the South China Sea. So in effect, we could say that the United States is moving tactical nuclear warheads, because if the W-76-2 is on any of the systems on that submarine, and we don't know, but what we do know is because the United States has just entered into an agreement with the Japanese and the South Koreans about joint nuclear planning, and that includes the use of American submarines, such as the one that just docked. How do we know that? Because we gave a tour of these submarines to the Japanese and the South Koreans, who sent naval officers to tour it, to look at its capabilities, nuclear and conventional, and they're now involved in joint planning on how to use these weapon systems. So I would imagine that this submarine has tactical nuclear capability, and therefore the United States is moving them around. The same thing could be said if we move an Ohio-class submarine into the waters north of England. The Triton now can reach the Baltics, can reach Poland, it can reach Belarus. Now we have moved a tactical nuclear weapon into play. So the answer is yes, we are moving tactical nuclear weapons around in response to Russia and China.
All right. Tommy gun 8888 as compared to all the other Tommy guns out there. How do you rate current NATO planning capabilities for a massive war against Russia or China? How does it compare with capability of Russia or China? And thank you for the donation, Tommy gun.
Planning. I think that NATO is a tremendous bureaucracy that has put a lot of, just to give you, I'm writing an article right now that talks about the Cora system. Cora is a German-made computer simulation used to exercise command staffs for conventional ground warfare. The Cora system was used to train the Ukrainians on combined arms warfare against the exact target they're attacking. The Cora it can absorb real-world geographical data, so you can create accurate maps upon which you project your forces and their capabilities, and you have this scenario. But in researching this, I had to read a lot of NATO papers. Fun stuff. And you're getting into the weeds about this, and it just brought back nightmares of when the Marine Corps made a strategic decision in the early 1990s to stop being the Marine Corps and start being something that was more business-like. They adapted some civilian term, I forget what they called it, total something management or something. But all real Marine leaders went, we don't manage, we lead. That's the difference. Let other people manage. We lead. And leadership is sort of this visceral thing that it's hard to put on. Like, it when you see it, but they wanted to manage. Management requires coordination and a lot of staffing and things like that. The Marines are pretty good at staff work, but it's always focused on being very oriented towards achieving a combat objective, not staffing for staffing purposes. But as I waded through these NATO documents, it just became clear that NATO is basically a bureaucracy layered upon a bureaucracy, layered upon a bureaucracy, layered upon a bureaucracy, etc. Now, they can produce plans because they have a whole bunch of people whose job is to do just that, plan. But their planning is not effective. Their plans can't be executed. To give you an example, the Germans have the Cora system. They used Cora to train, to plan this counteroffensive using the Ukrainian forces. A lot of people spent a lot of time using Cora, coming up with plans. But what happened? The plan fell apart the moment reality hit. Now, had the Marine Corps been involved in the training of the Ukrainians, we'd have gotten rid of Corps because it's stupid. We'd have gotten rid of all the Germans because they don't know how to fight. We'd have gotten rid of everybody that gets in the way of the basic task of closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower and maneuver. And we would have made the plan as simplistic as possible, as violent as possible, and maybe the Ukrainians would have had a slight chance of doing something effectively against the Russians. But the NATO planners got involved, and as a result, they created something that looks good on paper, horrible in reality. NATO plans suck. Now, let's talk about the Russians. I can't talk about the Chinese because Chinese haven't fought a major ground war in a long time. The last one they fought was against the Vietnamese in 1979, and it was a bloody fiasco. The Chinese were doing human wave tactics, and they suffered a lot of casualties. And they ended up losing. I mean, it wasn't a strategic defeat, but it wasn't the victory that the Chinese were looking for. But the Chinese have improved, and we know that because they're working closely with the Russians. They do joint planning sessions. They do large-scale military exercises where they coordinate with one another. So I don't think that the Chinese are, bad at it. But planning, as I said, it's one thing to plan on paper. It's another thing to turn a plan into reality. And so China will put aside because I'd have to be making some assumptions about whether or not their plans would actually bear fruit if ever called upon to pull the trigger. The Russians, on the other hand, we can take a look at the planning that was done for this counteroffensive. First of all, the Russians started this conflict with the mindset of the special military operation. It wasn't an invasion of Ukraine. It was a special military operation, the planning assumptions of which were to compel the Ukrainians to the negotiating table that they rejected in the lead up to the war. Remember, Russia was always trying to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. The terms they were looking for weren't bad, just neutrality, and then you get to keep all of Ukraine. That didn't work. So they went to war. But the war was designed to pressure Ukraine back to the negotiating table. And it almost worked. By April 1st, a little over a month after the war started, Russia was ready to sit down in Istanbul and sign a peace treaty that would have kept Ukraine intact for the most part. Donbass and the Donetsk and Lugansk would have been independent, but not part of Russia. Only Crimea would have been Russia. But Kherson, Zaporizhia, this would have been part of Ukraine. Enter NATO. They said no. That was the end of that. Now they're at war. The Russians are now sitting there going, well, gosh, we went in with 200,000 men because our goal wasn't to occupy Ukraine, but to pressure them into a peace treaty, and after which we would leave. So now the Russians have to deal with this new reality that now is complicated further by NATO providing tens of billions of dollars of military assistance and training to the Ukrainians to rebuild the military that Russia was destroying. Ukraine launched an offensive operation in September. The Russians weren't prepared. Jeff, you and I have talked about this. Game changer. Remember that? We're not allowed to use that term, but it was a game changer, etc. My point is this, that the Russians learned from those mistakes. They absorbed those lessons. They mobilized 300,000 men. They have another 150,000, 200,000 volunteers coming in addition to the 180,000 that they had left in the special military operation zone. So you have a lot of Russians now who are well-trained, well-equipped, well-led. And the Russians planned next. They said, what's going to happen next? I bet the Ukrainians are going to want to go on the counteroffensive. Now, it wasn't a big deal to come up with this conclusion because, gosh, in October, you had the Ukrainians saying, we want to go on the counteroffensive. You remember Zaluzhny came out of Ramstein and said, if you guys want us to attack, you have to basically give me, 300 tanks, 500 infantry vehicles, a couple hundred artillery pieces, infinite amount of ammunition, F-16. Basically, you have to give me an army. And NATO went, okay. And they did. They provided all this stuff, trained the Ukrainians up so the Ukrainians could be prepared starting June 4th to carry out a counteroffensive. But in the meantime, Russia's looking at going, okay, how do we prepare for 60,000 heavily armed Ukrainians to come at us? What do we need to do? We need to build doctrinal defenses. Well, what is doctrinal defenses? The last Russian doctrine was related to Soviet defensive theory that came out of the 1970s and 1980s. The world has changed. Technology has changed. Lethality has changed. And so they had this guy named Colonel General Alexander Romanchuk. And basically Romanchuk, He was the deputy commander of the 58th Army, the Southern Military District. He was participated in early phases of the Ukrainian conflict, and he was pulled out and sent to the Combined Arms Academy, where he sat down and went, "What are the lessons learned here? What have we learned about how modern wars are fought, how Ukraine's fighting, how NATO fights, and then how do we apply that to current defensive doctrine?" And he wrote a paper, and that paper was used by the Russians to design the defensive system that they've installed in the newly acquired territories of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk, even extending into Crimea. They've built a layered defensive system based upon 3 separate barriers connected by firepower, etc., designed to receive the attack, absorb the attack, dissipate the attack, and counterattack. They built it. The troops that went there their training plan was devised by Romanchuk and others, and then they pulled Romanchuk out of the headquarters and put him in command of the defense of Zaporizhia. So you have the man who designed the defense, who built the defense, who trained the people to defend, now commanding that, the strongest possible situation. That's called good planning, ladies and gentlemen. That's outstanding planning. The Russians basically have all the right pieces there, and they have the logistics to support it. They've been hoarding their ammunition so that when the Ukrainians come in, the Russians are enabled not only to disperse the attackers, but to take out the counter battery. Why are the Ukrainians not able to stop Russian aircraft and helicopters? Because the Russians, planning in advance, carried out a concerted suppression of enemy air defense campaign that predated the counteroffensive by weeks, if not months. And they destroyed the totality of Ukraine's air defense system so that Ukraine cannot project anti-air capacity through the front lines into the Russian deep areas. So Russian aircraft can operate freely without fear of interdiction, bombing the Ukrainians. Helicopters can come up, slaughter the Ukrainians. This is called planning. Everything the Russians are doing right now is going according to plan, which means the Russians do planning pretty well.
All right. That's it for this week's episode of Ask the Inspector. Thanks to Ann Moss for her great work backstage. Thanks to our beloved audience for all their contributions. And most of all, thanks to our favorite weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, who's nursing his cough and sounding at least better than you did the last episode. So I think you're on the road to recovery. I'd like to remind folks to check out our Substack, which is at scottritterextra.com. And the latest article is Finally the Bull Charged. Also, if you would like to be very, very muscular within 1 week, I encourage you to buy an Ask the Inspector t-shirt. There's our supermodel, Ryan Milton, out of Austin, Texas. And you can get to that page by going to scottritter.us. Same for the autographed book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. And our new merchandise, just added, is horseradish. So you can enjoy it either as a food or as a way to tell people to fuck off.
But just so you know, I am finishing up a new Substack article that I'll be sending to Jeff tonight. I don't know. Jeff probably needs rest and recuperation from this.
No, I don't drink Diet Coke, so I'm just brimming with energy.
Yeah. So you're bursting with energy because Diet Coke is the counter energy. But prior to the Bull Finally Charged article, I wrote the introduction to a series we're calling Waging Peace. But Waging Peace is also the name of a documentary film that we're getting ready to make. And it's also going to be the name of a book that I'm writing about my experience in Russia. I think Jeff and I talked, and basically we're going to end up publishing around 30% of the book on Substack, sort of as a teaser to get people interested. But it's going to be self-published by us, and the book consists of about 15 chapters, and then there will be a series of what I call vignettes. Vignettes are basically interesting things that happened during the trip, but they don't constitute enough data points for a full chapter. And so what I've prepared is the first vignette of related to this story, and I'll be sending it to Jeff tonight, and it's called The Coin. And basically, it outlines the history of the challenge coin, the unique challenge coin that was made in support of this trip, how that came about, and then what role that coin played in this trip. And I think it's a pretty interesting story, and I look forward to getting it out there on Substack and seeing how people react.
If you really send it tonight, I will pledge to the audience right now that it will be published tomorrow.
I will really send it tonight because I'm really almost done. I was working so hard on it that Marina actually had to call me. Oh, wait a minute, Voldemort called and said,
"You used your name 6 times tonight. You spanking."
I know I'm going to get so much trouble, but that she was like, "Hey, dude, you got to go get ready for the show." Ouch. And so that's why I was 3 minutes late, because I was so focused on trying to get this Substack article done that
all right, it was for a good reason. It was for a good reason. All right, join us next Tuesday and every Tuesday for the lightning round of Ask the Inspector. That's when Scott answers every question in 3 minutes or less, and we'll be back next Friday night for the loquacious version. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Daniel Ellsberg, for a life well lived and for inspiring us all.
Well said.